This is the ICO Alert Podcast, Episode 9. I'm your host, Robert Finch, founder of ICO Alert. ICO Alert is the trusted source for analysis of ICOs, otherwise known as initial coin offerings. We maintain a comprehensive list of ICOs on our website at ICOalert.com. If you're new to the ICO space or even the blockchain space, don't worry, we've got you covered. Head to start.icoalert.com, where we have helpful introductions to this exciting new world, introductions about ICOs, and introductions about the blockchain space in general. That's start, START.icoalert.com. My guest today is Esteban Ordano, the technical lead at Decentraland. During the podcast, we'll talk about the Decentraland project, their plans to build a fully decentralized virtual world, how they envision the future of virtual reality unfolding, and more. As a final note before we get started, Esteban, who I'm speaking with today, was very jet-lagged when recording this podcast, having just got off a flight from China to San Francisco. The podcast is still fantastic and loaded with information, but it may move a little slower than you're used to. With that being said, let's get to it. All right, so I'm super excited about my guest today. This is a project that I've been following for a while since they announced that they were actually going to launch an ICO, and it's interesting also because it's been in development for several years. The project that I'm talking about and the people that we're talking with today is Decentraland. So my guest today is Esteban Ordano, the technical lead at Decentraland. We're going to talk a lot about that project, what they plan to do, and their ICO, which is coming up very soon. Esteban, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks a lot for inviting me, Robert.
Yeah, it's great to have you. Like I said, this is one of the projects I've been the most excited about, really in the ICO, in the ICO space in general. I mean, I do just want to jump into it. But before we do that, I know there are a lot of people that, maybe they've heard of Decentraland, maybe they haven't, they're not sure what it is. Could you give like a brief overview of what your platform is?
So Decentraland is a virtual reality world. It's powered by the Ethereum blockchain. There's a smart contract that determines who owns each parcel of land in this virtual reality world. And on top of these parcels, you will be able to create experiences for your users, for your guests in this virtual reality world, and set up shop applications, museums, and all kinds of different activities and experiences for users that visit your land.
Okay,
it's a social experience on top of the blockchain.
Yeah, that's a great explanation of it. So basically just a shared virtual world where anybody can come in and buy land.
That's right.
Okay, very cool. So one of the main questions I had from the community when I was saying, Decentraland's going to be on the podcast. Do you have any questions? A lot of people were curious, is there some like main application through which everyone is accessing the world? So Decentraland, basically they wanted me to clarify that Decentraland is actually this one virtual world that we can all actually see and walk around in and see other people. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes, at the time being, we have a proof of concept. It's called the Bronze Age. First, we started with the Stone Age, which was kind of like $1 million web page where you could mine pixels and determine the colors of those pixels in this website. Then we moved to the Bronze Age, where it's a 3D world where you can set up static content on top of it. Looks like a Burning Man playa of some sort. And at the moment, you cannot see other users walking around, but we have a prototype that is doing that right now, and we're pretty excited to continue improving that experience.
Okay, that's awesome. So you mentioned people will be able to claim land, and I want to talk about how that process actually works in a little bit. But first, I wanted to talk about some of the potential applications that people could build on top of the land. So you mentioned like anyone can build an application on their land. How does that process work, and what kind of apps do you envision coming to Decentraland?
Sure. So the first applications that we think that people are going to build based on what has been discussed in the Slack are mainly games or casinos of some sort. We're also going to see cinemas and public forums, activities on which you can build and share things with other users. Those are our first use cases. We are also expecting to host virtual reality meetings, like conferences. The blockchain community is very widely distributed throughout the world, and so a lot of people have been traveling around the world, and we are going to be able to set up some HTCs, some headsets on those conferences to make the experience accessible for people that may not have been able to fly to those conferences. So that's another use case that we are very excited about.
That's awesome. So theoretically, I could, like, let's say I put on my virtual reality headset and Token Summit or Consensus, some big crypto event is happening in New York. I could put on my headset and then kind of be there in the virtual world.
So yes, a shared experience, a mixed experience between going to the conference, for example, meeting up with a community that is on other city, or talking with some people that are inside the conference and outside the conference, or merely purely virtual reality conferences that happen on Decentraland is another use case that we envision that will happen.
Okay, that's great. So, and you mentioned gaming, gambling, casinos. So theoretically, like I could walk, let's say, some big casino provider, whether it's Funfair or BetKing or one of these other big casino platforms that's launched as like a blockchain casino. So I guess theoretically they could buy a plot of land and set up a casino in Decentraland, and then I could walk in with my virtual character and play one of their casino games.
That's exactly right. We're actually talking with Funfair about how to integrate their fair channels, and I think it's called their technology for payment channels with probably fair gambling.
One thing I did want to touch on, this is another question I got from the community, was, if anybody can go in and build an application on top of their land, is it possible for a user with malicious intent to go in and put like an application on their piece of land that has a malware in it or some other kind of malicious code to attack people that go into that application?
Yes, the security model for the scripting language is one of the biggest challenges that we will be facing. Our approach so far is going to be whitelisting certain components that we allow users to use in their land. So if I'm exploring land and I suddenly see some script that has not been whitelisted, I will get a prompt and say, hey, do you want to trust the content on this land? And well, if you do, then you can execute and enjoy the experience.
Oh, okay, I see. So it's kind of up to the users at first, but also some of the security protocols that will be built into the scripting language?
Yes, because, well, downloading a piece of script from IPFS, from an anonymous source, and executing that in your computer has some pretty serious security risks.
Yeah, definitely. And I can see why the community was asking that as well. But it'll be interesting to see how you guys approach that and how you can kind of lock that down and make it a safe experience. One thing I did want to talk about now is something I alluded to earlier, which is just the process of actually going in and claiming land. So I think this is pretty interesting where, during your ICO, which is coming up very soon, and we'll talk about that a little later, you're not selling the land individually. You're actually in exchange for contributions, you're giving people mana. And mana is kind of the currency of the Decentraland universe. Could you talk a little bit about how I use that mana to claim land?
Yes, so mana is a standard ERC20 token, and land is a registry of XY coordinates that is going to behave pretty similarly to the ENS domain system. So by burning a thousand units of mana, you will be able to claim land that is adjacent to some other parcel that has been already allocated. And once you own that land, you can set the owner of that to your own account or to a smart contract. We are seeing some pretty interesting ideas coming up from the community about having homeowners associations, setting up neighborhoods, and policing over the content of your neighbors. Because if I set up shop next to somebody that may have different intentions for their land, it would be nice to have some way to negotiate what content goes in the neighborhood.
Yeah, that's very cool.
We think that people are going to be clustering around different interests. So it's going to be very exciting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, so you mentioned that you can only claim land that's adjacent to other land that's already been claimed. So basically that just prevents me from going and like buying a plot of land in the middle of nowhere. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. So the world won't be completely square, and our idea of traversing the virtual reality world is that you will be able to find new content and explore the world and get to know different experiences that are outside of whatever you are usually exploring. For example, when you visit a website, you only see the content that is on that website. But within Decentraland, you would also be able to see what content is being put up on the next parcel of land. So maybe something catches your eye and you can go and see what it's all about.
Okay, cool. And that I think is like one of the coolest value propositions about this. Like if Funfair does end up building a casino and they set up like a casino district or something like that within the universe, it'll be really cool to like you said, I mean, be able to, you can sit in the casino and you look out the window or you go outside and you see something awesome in the distance and go over there and explore it. How will people actually be able to move around? Like, are you able to teleport anywhere in the Decentraland universe? Because, you know, as this thing grows and grows and grows, it's probably going to be pretty big. Is there going to be like a bus system, or can I buy a car in the game and like drive it around, or how does that all work?
Yeah. So our first, at the beginning, we didn't want users to be able to teleport anywhere. But our first pull request was actually how to teleport to any arbitrary parcel of land. The limiting the ability of a user to go from here to there is virtually impossible. So what we will probably see is people actually coming up with some social rules about not teleporting here and there. One of the other ideas that came out from the community is a public transportation system. And another suggestion that came from the community is that of having a neighborhood enforce the rules for teleporting. So in order to go from one land to the next one, you will have to have some access token that came from the person that runs the other land. This is because the system for peer-to-peer communication requires some kind of coordination, central coordination. We call those rendezvous servers that keep track of who is exploring which parcel of land. So if I want to go to parcel 1010, I go to the Ethereum blockchain, download some file based on what is there in the smart contract, and this file tells me which rendezvous server to contact. And when I set up a connection to that rendezvous server, I get a list of peers that are exploring the same parcel of land as myself.
Okay, very cool. That's interesting. I didn't realize you could actually lock down your land and, you know, require a token or something for people to teleport there. That's pretty interesting. And I think like that's probably one of the most interesting aspects about this that we'll kind of see develop is like, how does the community kind of create this world, since they are really creating the world? I mean, does the land exist before people claim it, or is it kind of just generated as, you know, people claim land next to other adjacent land?
We're going to be creating, at least for the initial city, we call it the Genesis city. a default content that are just some trees or roads and buildings, but you can change whatever it's there by default and set up your own buildings or landscape.
Okay, so that's kind of like public space in the world, I guess.
Yes, that's correct. Well, it's actually the default content, not public space, but it's a guideline. So we know that the default experience is not just a wasteland, and people have, at least for the initial Genesis City, at least some guidance on how to build and where to build.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. So like part of the world will already kind of be landscape with roads and parks and trees and stuff like that, so that then when I buy a plot of land, I could change it and remove the tree and build a building. But that way it's not just like a desert, basically, like the Burning Man you described. Okay.
Exactly.
Because for those of you listening, if you go to decentraland.org, you can click on launch and then walk around their kind of demo. And that was the Bronze Age that Esteban was talking about, where you can walk around and see some creations that are built. It's more of a proof of concept, and the full one will come out later. Let's talk more about how you're actually claiming land. So what's most interesting to me about the claiming process is that you're not just exchanging the 1,000 mana for the land, and then like you guys aren't getting that mana. Like that mana is actually being burned or destroyed when I claim the land. So does that in effect kind of put a limit on the number of land that can be claimed, since there's a finite amount of mana?
Yes, exactly. Our idea with limiting mana is actually to limit land. If land were infinite, you wouldn't have this ability to explore and find new experiences if somebody could claim all of the land for themselves.
Okay, that makes sense. So will the world continue to expand, or is this like I guess my question is, how much mana are you guys selling through this ICO, and will there be more mana added in the future to, allow for the continued expansion of the world?
So after the initial token sale is over, we will be continuing to issue 8% of the initial amount created each year. This doesn't compose, but it allows new users to go directly to the smart contract and buy new mana, so they can claim their own land without having to buy that mana from somebody else.
Okay, interesting. And what price will that mana be? Like, since mana ostensibly will be traded on exchanges once, after the ICO happens and there's mana, it's an ERC20 token, so somebody will end up putting it on an exchange, whether it's a decentralized one or a centralized one like Bittrex or something. Are you guys going to adjust the price of the mana in that smart contract to meet the price of mana on exchanges?
We are looking at different options to how to set that price. Maybe we would like it to be higher than the market price or lower than the market price. We're still looking at the different alternatives.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I mean, both of those are pretty interesting. It reminds me a lot of, I don't know if you've heard of EOS, but they're running like a year-long ICO. And obviously, like, you guys aren't running an ICO with that, but they have these periods every 24 hours where, depending on the amount of ether that's contributed, the price of EOS, the token that they're selling, changes, obviously, since there are a fixed like 2 million EOS in every 24-hour period. And that generally affects the exchange price directly. So it'll be interesting to see like kind of the dynamic between the exchanges and your smart contract that issues mana. But I think that's very cool. I noticed on your website, so you have the Stone Age, which was like that simple grid of pixels, just kind of the initial concept, the Bronze Age, which is what we can currently see on the website now. And then it talks about this Terraform event in Q3 2017, where it says it'll allow you to actually claim land. Can you talk about how that will work? Is there going to be like a queue to get in and pick the best land? Because if I'm thinking about it, where I'm going to buy my land, I'm going to try, to go into the Genesis City, or to try to like predict where Funfair might build their casino and try to buy up a bunch of land around there. Can you talk about how that'll work?
Yes, we're setting up a queuing system. We want to make it as fair as possible for everybody to get their own land in the Genesis City. But after this Terraform event, we're going to be releasing any constraints to claiming land. And that will allow somebody to build their own city somewhere outside of the Genesis city, and they can set up their own aesthetics, their own governance system, and they will have no restrictions on how big their plots of land will be.
Okay, interesting. So those plots could be bigger than the 10 meters by 10 meters?
Oh, I mean the blocks that they claim, the blocks of plots of land.
Oh, okay. So like being able to go in and claim five plots next to each other.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, that'll be interesting to see if like somebody builds their own district and then tries to sell the land to somebody else. And is that something that's going to be possible? Like, are you going to be able to sell or lease your land to somebody else within the world?
We are partnering with District.OX. They're going to be setting up a market for land which is non-fungible. It's not the same as trading a fungible token like mana. It's in some sense, as I mentioned previously, similar to a domain name.
Yeah, so the partnership with District.0x, they're essentially building like a district. If people listening, if you're not familiar with District.0x, they have a token called DNT, which allows you to stake and kind of gain control or gain voting rights over a certain district. So they're launching something called Name Bazaar, which is like a marketplace for ENS names. They're launching something called Meme Factory, which is similar to Pepe Cash, which is like provably rare memes that you can buy and sell and trade. So I guess essentially they're just making a marketplace for Decentraland land as well.
Yes, that's correct. You will be able to buy and sell land in a district in exchange for DNT tokens, I guess.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and this is super interesting. I don't know if you've heard of have you heard of a game called Second Life?
Yes, I did.
Okay, yeah. So this is what initially caught my attention about Decentraland. There was a game many years ago, and I'm pretty sure it still exists. But Second Life was this virtual world. It wasn't virtual reality because when it launched 10 or 15 years ago, maybe, obviously VR wasn't a thing. You could kind of create your own character and have, a second life. And it was a real world. You could walk around. Players could eventually buy land within the game. And then that land would kind of have some kind of inherent value as you like built a restaurant on top of it, or like a furniture store or something like that. But what's really interesting, kind of the parallels between Second Life and Decentraland, is that Second Life was totally controlled by the company, and they had a currency called lindens. And these lindens were under complete control of the developers, including the market price. So like they would say, okay, 1,000 lindens equals $1 or whatever the exchange rate might be, and that was kind of fixed. But that was how you got money in and out of the system. But what's interesting is in 2006, a woman named Aylin Grafe, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but Aylin made headlines for turning $9.95, which she bought lindens with, into over $1 million by buying and selling virtual real estate within Second Life. So like what she would do is just kind of buy property, lease it out, and just kind of monetize it that way using this in-game currency. There was another person who went the seedier route and actually set up strip clubs on a bunch of different land within Second Life. And he would build up a virtual strip club, get it real popular, sell it for like $100,000 real dollars to somebody else, and then kind of move on to the next one. Is this something that you see happening within Decentraland? Like, do you think, let's say I buy a plot of land that Funfair needs for their casino. Do you see them actually coming to somebody else and saying, hey, we'll buy that land from you? Or, we see that you made a casino out in this other part that we want to buy and make a Funfair casino. Do you think that'll be a thing that actually happens in your world?
Yes, definitely. We envision that those things will happen. Second Life is a very good example of what we are trying to build, but we want to take out all of the central points of failure that Second Life had. It's still a $600 million economy, by the way.
Wow, I had no idea. That's amazing.
Yes. I've met with a lot of people from their community, some people that have been actually made a living out of Second Life.
Wow.
There are very interesting use cases in there. Actually, one of the things that most people say is that they don't want to keep paying rent for their land in Second Life.
Oh, interesting.
Yes, and we've also heard a lot of complaints about acts of Linden. That's how they call it, the ability that Linden has to change the rules inside of the game. We, we hope in Decentraland to make an open platform that anybody can, so that anybody can participate in this virtual world and not being subject to arbitrary rulings by any central party.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. So what was some of the responses from these people who, you spoke with in the Second Life community? Are they super excited about Decentraland? Did they have any concerns about the platform?
Most of them are very excited about Decentraland. They're helping to build the vision of Decentraland. We have a community vision program where everybody can participate and collaborate with their own ideas. It's out there in our GitHub, github.com/Decentraland. And we've seen all sorts of things like how to build the item systems, avatars, the cities, roads, transportation system, all of the things that you will think that a virtual world should have. Most of the community members are discussing how to build up all of those.
Oh, okay, that's awesome. And so this community vision program, I saw, I think it was in your Slack or on your website, essentially like the layout for the Genesis City. Are there other things like that you're excited about that the community has contributed already, or is it really just kind of limited to the Genesis City right now?
Well, I don't know if you've read Snow Crash, the novel by Neil Stephenson.
No.
But it's a great book, one of those big cypherpunk novels out there. And in this virtual world, the metaverse of Neil Stephenson, there was this hacker lounge called the Black Sun, where people will go and hang out with other hackers and people that have helped build the metaverse. We have our own Black Sun community inside of the Decentraland, and they're planning a city of their own, as well as different groups out there as well.
Okay, that's awesome. Yeah, it's going to be really curious. I mean, I kind of said this earlier, but it's going to be super exciting to see just how the world develops and like, is there going to be a virtual Times Square where there are tons of billboards and ads up, or is there going to be like a casino district like Vegas or something like that? But I think myself and many others are super excited to see where this all goes. I wanted to talk more about your roadmap. So I mentioned the Stone Age, the Bronze Age, which we're currently in. We'll have the Terraform event sometime in Q3 of 2017 after this ICO happens. And then it says on your website that when the Terraform event happens, the Iron Age or the beta of the Iron Age will actually come out. And so the Iron Age, as it's described on your website, says it will support multiplayer support with avatars and live chat, custom scripting on the land that you own. So is this kind of what you were talking about earlier, like the ability to see other players in the game and interact with them?
Yes, exactly. We're adding this peer-to-peer layer on top of the static content that we already have. And the beta is beta because the scripting system, it's probably going to take a little longer to develop. But yeah, we hope to accommodate for use cases like galleries, real estate showrooms, and virtual conferences to happen on this beta of the Iron Age.
That's awesome. Yeah, and that's also very similar to Second Life. I remember watching some kind of documentary. I'm blanking on the name of it, but essentially there was this whole profile within that documentary about this girl who kind of became like a semi-famous musician within Second Life by hosting live concerts within Second Life. And of course, in real life, she was, in front of her computer and like singing through a mic and playing on a guitar in real life. And her character was doing the same thing in the world. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. And then after the Iron Age, so after the multiplayer support, the avatars, the live chat, you have what's called the Silicon Age. And this, I think, is kind of like the grand vision of Decentraland. So it says on your website, it's a full-fledged 3D world with full VR, virtual reality support, and customization of the laws of physics. And then it says, live in the blockchain. So is this the same world as the Iron Age, just kind of upgraded with like better graphics and being sort of fully migrated into the blockchain?
Yes, and one of the key aspects of that would be to hand over the governance of the land smart contract and the mana smart contract to a DAO. We think that to kickstart this world, we need to centralize the development in our team in order to move faster. But eventually, we think that Decentraland should be completely decentralized and not depend on one single entity to keep it alive.
Oh, okay, very cool. So it is kind of like that whole concept of being like a decentralized version of Second Life, obviously with like way more features and this whole world. Let's talk about the technical side of things for a second, if that's all right. I know you're the technical lead at Decentraland. I'm curious how this all works. Like, how is it possible to have a 3D world hosted in the blockchain? Like, what kind of technologies are you using to make that possible?
Okay, so the first layer would be the Ethereum smart contract. In this Ethereum smart contract, each XY coordinate maps to an owner and a content file or a hash of that content file that you can go and fetch on a distributed hash table peer-to-peer service. We are currently using BitTorrent, or actually, we currently moved from BitTorrent to using IPFS for that content distribution. And when you get this content file, this description, meta description of the land, you can see what server to connect to in order to bootstrap connections to other users that are close by. So let's say that you go to land plot at the coordinates 2010 and somebody else is already in there. You both should have connections to one central server, one that the owner of the land directed you to connect to. And this rendezvous server is going to exchange messages between both of those clients to set up a channel between them to share your position, messages, and voice chat. That is what allows the peer-to-peer social layer on top of this in a pretty much decentralized way. There's still this issue of who is running the rendezvous server, but there are some alternatives that are not as centralized as that server.
Okay.
For example, you could use a DHT like the Swarm network from Ethereum, or IPFS has a very similar solution for that.
Yeah, that's awesome. So is the actual Decentraland world, like the virtual world that I walk around on and can explore land, is that also hosted on IPFS, or is that something else?
Yes. So what we think is that people that own land will probably be interested in serving their content to all of their users. And when you're making money from the casino that you run in there or the experiences that you run in there, you are probably incentivized to make the experience of exploring the world amenable to your users, so it downloads fast, and you should also be serving the content of your neighbors. So when your users are exploring your neighbors' parcels, if your neighbors haven't been serving fast enough their content, you can give a hand in there and allow them to explore the neighborhood a lot faster.
Okay, that's awesome. So I wanted to kind of jump out of the tech side of things for a little bit and talk more about Mana, which is the ERC20 token that you guys are giving out in exchange for contributions during your ICO. So in addition to being able to burn or destroy 1,000 mana to claim a piece of land, it mentions in your white paper that mana is also used for in-game purchases. So, like going back to the Second Life example, does this mean that I could set up like a furniture store and sell furniture to other people that they use in their homes on their plots of land or whatever it may be in exchange for mana? Like, is that the kind of the currency of this universe?
Yes, we think that is going to be happening, but of course, it's probably not going to be limited to mana. Other currencies can also exist and compete with that.
Okay, so I could also buy that furniture or whatever I'm buying in the game with like Ethereum or something like that.
Yes, probably. Our client is going to be open source, and anybody can contribute patches for it to use other currencies. But I am mostly excited about when the Lightning Network comes and we are able to make very small when we are able to create payments that are low fee and almost instant.
Oh, okay, like microtransactions?
Yes, exactly. A couple of years ago, we were part of the team that created Streamium, which was one of the first applications of payment channels.
Yeah.
And I've been excited about payment channels for a long time now. The thing is, the Lightning Network came out and everybody was, okay, we cannot build anything using payment channels until Lightning Network comes because it's going to be so much more efficient. But it's taken a little longer than I expected for that vision to materialize.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. So the last thing that I want to talk about before we kind of wrap up and talk about your ICO details is, so you mentioned you have a partnership with District 0x where like they're kind of building a district or a marketplace to allow people to buy, sell, or lease land to somebody else. Are there any other partnerships that you'd like to mention or that you've already disclosed? I know you mentioned Funfair is kind of looking at potentially building a casino here. Is there anybody else?
No, but we are looking at other projects and trying to see how we can collaborate with them. We think that Decentraland has this massive market appeal that most other projects in the blockchain space do not really have. Like it, with Decentraland, we can appeal to a wider audience, and you don't necessarily need to be a crypto user in order to explore Decentraland.
Yeah, it'd be cool to see how that all develops and like who actually ends up building there. I know I'll be buying some land and building something there, maybe something for ICO Alert, or maybe just like a house to kind of be in the world. I'm super excited about it. I wanted to kind of wrap up by talking about just your ICO details. So users, like we mentioned, are buying mana, which you can use to buy land or buy stuff in the game. Starting out, it looks like 1,000 mana is $24, which buys you one plot of land. And then obviously we have the Terraform event, and as the every day, I guess, during the ICO, the price per 1,000 mana, even though you don't have to buy 1,000, that's not a minimum, but the price per mana essentially increases. When does your ICO actually happen? What's the start date?
It's August the 18th at noon at 00 GMT.
Okay, awesome. So it could be the 17th for some people, I guess, if they're in a different time zone?
Yes, for America mostly, it's going to be on the 17th. And for Asia and most of Europe, it's going to be on the 18th.
Okay, very cool. So obviously, you guys are doing some kind of continual mana issuance. Is that how do you think that your concept of Decentraland is going to be able to sustain itself, like as a business? Obviously, you'll get a big chunk of revenue up front or a big chunk of starting capital through this ICO to kind of pay your developers and build out the necessary tech that you need to make the world work. Is the continual issuance of mana how you kind of see the world sustaining itself, or do you see it just passing over to a bunch of independent people who will just be kind of maintaining it as like a decentralized world?
Yes, that continuous issuance, the proceeds that come from that continuous issuance, we envision that going towards serving content, and probably hosting the rendezvous servers, so that within 10 years or 5 years or whenever we can hand over the execution of Decentraland to a DAO, the world continues to exist and all the incentives are aligned for the experience to be as smooth as possible.
Oh, okay, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, it's going to be really awesome just to see how this all develops. I wanted to give you one last chance. If there's anything else you wanted to add that we haven't covered, now would be a good time to mention it.
Well, I welcome all of your audience to join our Slack and help us build the metaverse, the virtual world of the future.
Awesome. And where can they find out more about Decentraland?
It's decentraland.org.
Awesome. That sounds great. Well, Esteban, thanks so much for chatting with me. I hope you get some sleep after that jet lag. I know it's been a crazy couple of days with the trip, but thanks so much for joining me.
No, thanks a lot, Robert. A pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. I sincerely appreciate it. If you'd like to request someone to be on the podcast, tweet us at ICO Alert and let us know. We're trying to cover all the ICOs. That includes past ICOs, present ICOs, and ICOs that are, of course, happening in the future. Thank you again, and if you haven't already, please do subscribe to get updates when we publish a new episode. Also, don't forget to check out ICOalert.com for our in-depth analysis of upcoming ICOs, as well as our comprehensive list of every initial coin offering. I'm your host, Robert Finch, and I'll be back next week or sooner with a brand new episode.